So this is the podcast covering the chapter objectives for Chapter 9, Job Stress. The first thing that you're going to want to look at and cover are the various different models of organizational stress. There are a few that cover the main areas of what organizational stress is and how that relates to the workplace setting. And so you want to work through each of those, explaining the organizational role that stress is and the various sources of it, and become familiar with those various models. And each model sort of has its own concepts, its own components that you're going to want to look at. You've got the person environmental fit model. You've got the job demands control or job strain model, the effort reward imbalance model or ERI model, and then the organizational injustice model. And so those are like the big key ones. And organizational role stress is kind of like the first overarching one that you'll learn. It involves role conflict, role ambiguity, and role overload. These are just different aspects of kind of how we feel as we're trying to budget our time and manage our tasks in a work setting. So that's kind of like the umbrella model, organizational role stress, and then it gets into the other more specific models. Then we're going to be looking at what types of occupations bring about stress. So there's definitely specific occupations that with it comes more stress. We look at police and firefighters. We look at physicians, nurses. Especially right now, you're seeing the toll of stress on healthcare workers all over. And then different office workers come with its own loads of stress. We're then going to be looking at explaining what's unique about workplace stress. We've been talking about stress all semester. What's unique about the workplace stress and its relationship to health? And here's where you're going to see a lot of overlap with concepts we talked about earlier in the semester. When we watched the stress video, Portrait of a Killer, we looked at Dr. Sapolsky's findings on rank and status and how that affects stress. And this is very comparable to a lot of the workplace stress that people find themselves dealing with. And then, so what toll does that take on one's health? Then specifically, what are the hardships of shift work? Having a job where it requires maybe different shifts, going from day shift to night shift to third shift, and what are its connections to detrimental health? So the specifics of that, how it affects your heart, how it affects your biological cycle and your circadian rhythms. And then its links to other physiological issues, GI issues, cardiovascular issues, and even illnesses such as cancer. You're going to understand all of the elements and factors of burnout. What is burnout? Explaining the different components of it, and some research there in that field. And how it compares to vigor. Vigor is a very different and opposite concept to burnout, and it too has its own advantages, if you will. And so we're going to compare and contrast those. Explain the three-dimensional model of burnout developed by Maslach, and that's all outlined in your textbook, and looking at how burnout affects our health negatively. It's a cumulative effect over time. You can be stressed and burn out for a period of time and then have some rest and feel better, then go right back into a period of burnout. And this cycle kind of continues and can continue throughout one's life. When you go through 20 years of that, and it takes a really large toll on your body. So what might be some prevention and treatment for burnout? If this is happening in specific jobs more so than others, what can we do to combat that? Prevention's key, but if we don't get to the prevention end and all we have is treatment, what are a person's options and what routes might they take? Then we'll turn to looking at the role of workplace harassment and discriminations and how it affects levels of stress. What are the different forms of workplace discrimination and sexual harassment, and how that can cause differentiated stress amongst genders, and kind of what that's associated with health-wise. We'll look at different management strategies to relieve the burden of workplace stress. There's definitely some time management techniques that have been used to help in that scenario. So first, it's understanding what are poor time management aspects, time wasters, they typically call it, and we'll compare those to good time management strategies. Techniques that have been tried and true and shown to really be effective for people. Some don't come easy. It really depends on personality. Some people are more prone to being on task and some are not, but it's something that a person can develop with the right training and strategies. So this is really an awesome chapter for students, because these are the elements of stress right here for students. I think time management is a huge one. Students who lack goals or have too many goals, procrastinate, or are perfectionists, can come in and really stave off productivity and cause a lot of stress. Work interruptions, living maybe in an environment where you're not having a quiet space to work and you're interrupted a lot, can be a time management waste. So it's getting away from those and looking to some more popular time management strategies like keeping a daily time log, writing down your to-do list, prioritizing what to do, what your goals are for the day, to make sure that you accomplish those and you keep yourself on track. Getting rid of things that are unnecessary, saying no to things that are going to require time above and beyond what you can give, and really just pruning down to the basics and the essentials, especially in periods of high stress or high workplace demands. And definitely learning how to set boundaries, managing your workspace, delegating tasks when possible and appropriate, and of course scheduling in some relaxation time. And that's where we'll turn to some different aspects of motivation. We'll look at self-determination theory by Deci and Ryan, and its relationship to motivation, internal motivation, external motivation. And then we'll look at 10 major areas of job environment that's related to well-being. So we've learned a lot about what kinds of things create for good well-being. And employers are smart to pay attention to these if they want productive, good employees. They're going to try to create an environment in which the employee can thrive. And so we'll learn what those are. And then being familiar with the various workplace organizational interventions that are available to combat workplace stress. Many big organizations might even have embedded in them classes or counseling intervention that can help its employees when they're feeling this type of workplace stress. So what might be there to help proactively attack this? There are different levels of work stress organization, prevention and treatment. We've got primary prevention, secondary prevention, and tertiary prevention, much like we see in the healthcare realm when we're talking about prevention of illness. There's techniques that are you're going to want to try early on that are going to be helpful. There's some that, okay, you're already a little stressed, now what can you do? And then some where you're about to have a nervous breakdown, you've been stressed for a prolonged period of time. The tactics are going to be a little bit different in terms of what can help in that type of situation. So we'll look at all of those different areas. And then lastly, we'll turn towards a positive psychology approach in understanding job stress. A lot of what this textbook focuses on is that positive psych approach. So what kinds of aspects can people learn about to help them cope with distress and be able to manage their work stress? We'll look at savoring. We'll look at eustress, which is the good stress that promotes us to get work done and be productive. And that involves hope and vigor and meaningfulness. A lot of the concepts that we've been talking about actually in the McGonigal book apply here very much so. But also individual differences, and this comes from personality. We all differ in what we carry with us into our jobs. Some are more self-reliant. Some have, a differing locuses of control, external versus internal. Some are more hardy. Some are more optimistic versus pessimistic. So all of these factors are individual differences that can play a role. And this is where positive psychology really zones in on what those various factors are and what we can do depending upon where we lie on the spectrum of all of those. So that wraps up the chapter objectives for chapter 9. I also want to remind you all that, in studying for your test, you can use not only these objectives and outline these in more detail, but you can also use the chapter summary and concept review that's at the end of each Harrington chapter to go ahead and create an outline of topics to make sure that you're studying, everything that you need to. So that should be pretty helpful for you. That is what I would give for a study guide. And I believe that you can easily create one just by using these and using the chapter summaries in your book. So that concludes our objectives for chapter 9.